Israel did not fall into darkness overnight. It rotted slowly, quietly, until corruption felt normal. In Samaria, under the reign of King Ahab, the palace glowed with excess, while the nation starved. That night, the royal court gathered for a grand festival honoring Baal. Golden idols reflected torchlight. Music echoed through marble halls. Wine overflowed. Laughter drowned out the cries of the poor beyond the city walls. Jezebel watched with satisfaction. This was the kingdom she had built, a nation fed by false gods and ruled by fear. Outside the palace gates, guards stood relaxed, mocking beggars who pressed their faces against stone walls, desperate for crumbs. Then something changed. A man approached from the dust of the eastern road. His clothes were rough. His face was weathered by sun and silence. His eyes carried a weight that made mockery die on the lips of soldiers. One by one, they stepped aside without understanding why. Elijah walked forward. No trumpet announced him. No servant escorted him. He crossed the throne room alone, each step echoing louder than the music. Conversations faded. Idols seemed suddenly powerless in his presence. Elijah halted before Baal's altar and spoke, with a voice that cut through the hall like steel. As surely as the Lord lives, the God of Israel whom I serve, there will be no dew and no rain in these years unless I command it. Ahab scoffed and lifted his hand to have him seized. But before a single soldier stepped forward, a scorching wind tore through the chamber. Flames trembled. Dust exploded into the air, and Elijah vanished. Beyond the palace walls, clouds dissolved, moisture fled the air, and the heavens above, Israel slammed shut. Elijah did not escape Samaria. He was erased from it. God pulled him out of history's spotlight, buried him east of the Jordan in a ravine so narrow it felt like the earth itself was closing in. The brook Cherith whispered faintly between stones, as if even water was afraid to speak. No crowds followed him. No voices called his name. The prophet who had shaken a throne now lived unseen. At dawn and dusk, ravens descended from the sky. Creatures declared unclean by law became carriers of life. They dropped bread and meat at his feet and vanished again, leaving Elijah alone with his thoughts. Israel burned under a merciless sun while he survived in hiding. The contradiction tormented him. Had his obedience saved anyone at all? Days stretched into weeks. Silence pressed harder than hunger. And then the stream began to fail. Water pulled back inch by inch. Stones emerged like exposed bones. The sound of movement became a weak gasp. One morning, Elijah knelt reaching for the brook and touched only damp dust. The drought had finally found him. The brook was dead. Still, Elijah did not run. He waited. Then the voice returned. Rise, go to Zarephath, enemy land, Jezebel's homeland. No explanation, no reassurance, only direction. And Elijah stood learning that faith is proven not when heaven feeds you, but when everything dries up and God says walk. When the brook dried up, Elijah did not know where God was leading him. He only knew the direction of the command. Zarephath stood beyond Israel's borders inside enemy territory, a Baal-ruled city, where Jezebel's influence still lingered in every alley and altar. With each step toward it, Elijah felt as though he was walking deeper into danger, not deliverance. The widow who received him was no daughter of Israel. She was a woman of Zarephath, raised among idols, surrounded by neighbors who trusted Baal for rain and survival. Yet she obeyed the word Elijah brought at unimaginable cost. Day after day she poured flour that should have vanished. Night after night, she heard hushed voices outside her door. Neighbors whispered that Baal was displeased. They warned her that sheltering a prophet of a foreign god would invite disaster upon her house. Elijah heard those whispers too. Faith remained alive within those walls, but it trembled hanging by a thread. Then obedience reached its breaking point. The boy collapsed without warning. No sickness lingered, no time to pray ahead of it. Breath fled his body, as if life itself had been seized. The house fell silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of accusation. The widow's grief turned violent. "Why did you bring this upon us?" she cried. "Did your God follow you here to punish me?" In Baal's territory, death felt like proof that she had chosen wrong. Elijah felt the weight of the journey crush him. At Cherith, ravens had fed him. At Zarephath, obedience had led him straight into death. Doubt clawed at his faith. Had God sent him here to save or to destroy? He lifted the lifeless boy and carried him upstairs away from the widow's screams and the watching eyes of a city ready to judge. Alone. Elijah laid the child on the bed. The prophet who had commanded drought now stood helpless. He stretched himself over the boy and cried out, not with authority, but desperation. "Lord my God," he pleaded, "was this the end of obedience?" Once Elijah cried out. The room answered with silence, so heavy it pressed against his chest. Twice he pleaded again, and death did not move. The child remained cold, still, final. The third time Elijah pressed himself down with everything he had left, refusing to release the boy. As if gripping life itself, he cried out into the void, daring heaven to answer. Then a gasp tore through the silence. Breath rushed back into the child's lungs. Death broke. Life returned. Life surged where obedience had led into darkness. Elijah carried the living child downstairs. The widow collapsed to her knees. "Now I know," she whispered. "The Lord is God." In Baal's land, obedience had passed through death and come out alive. While life was restored in secret at Zarephath, terror ruled openly in Samaria. Ahab had not 4G, yet in the heart of the palace walked a man living a double life. Obadiah, the king's steward, feared the Lord deeply. Behind locked doors and beneath watchful eyes, he hid a secret powerful enough to destroy him. When Jezebel began slaughtering the prophets, Obadiah hid 100 of them in 2 caves, feeding them daily, while knowing discovery meant execution. One scorching day, Ahab sent Obadiah out to search for any trace of water. As Obadiah walked through a deserted road, a figure suddenly stepped into his path. Elijah. Obadiah's heart nearly stopped. "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" he whispered. Terror flooded his thoughts. If he reported Elijah and the prophet disappeared again, Obadiah would die for it. Elijah did not flinch. "Go and tell your master," he said. "Elijah is here. Today." There was no escape in his voice, no uncertainty, only authority. Obadiah looked into Elijah's eyes and understood something terrifying and undeniable. This meeting was not a coincidence. It was a summons. With trembling steps, Obadiah turned back toward Samaria, carrying words that would force a king out of hiding and set the stage for a confrontation. Heaven itself had ordained Otten Elijah. The drought tightened its grip, and with it grew the king's obsession. Wells were guarded. Springs were searched. Soldiers spread across the land, scouring valleys and hills for the prophet who had humiliated the throne. Jezebel's shadow loomed over every command. To shelter a servant of the Lord now meant death. The confrontation was not merely a meeting. It was the climax of 3 years of divine silence. Ahab arrived, not summoning the prophet, but being summoned by him. His chariot tore across the cracked earth, the king's face a mask of scarlet rage beneath the relentless sun. Elijah stood alone on the ridge of Mount Carmel, framed against the desolate mocking blue sky, while thousands of Israelites' elders, soldiers, and farmers climbed to witness the verdict. When Ahab finally pulled his horses to a halt, the silence was shattered by his venomous accusation. "Is that truly you, the author of Israel's ruin?" Elijah met the king's gaze with the unwavering fire in his own eyes. "I am not the one who authored this ruin, king," he thundered, his voice carrying down the slopes. You are, because you ripped up the ancient covenant and bowed to a lie. Today, we end the debate." He turned to the wavering crowd, his cloak snapping in the dry wind. "How long will you limp between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow the God who has failed you." The collective shame of the nation was their only reply. The spectacle began with the prophets of Baal. 850 of them, draped in garish robes, surrounded their freshly built altar. From dawn until the sun climbed to its zenith, they screamed their liturgy, dissolving into a chaotic, grotesque dance. They began to gash themselves, their blood staining the stones, a desperate, futile attempt to give life to their dead god. Elijah, utterly unmoved, watched the tragedy unfold. He then stepped out between the raving men, his voice dripping with sarcasm that cut deeper than their knives. "Shout louder. Perhaps he is merely taking a much-needed rest. Or perhaps your great storm god is too busy relieving himself to hear your plea." Desperation erupted into uncontrolled frenzy. They shrieked until their throats tore, but the heavens remained brass, utterly embarrassingly silent. Then, as Baal's silence settled like defeat, Elijah stepped forward. With calm reverence, he rebuilt the Lord's broken altar using 12 uncut stones. He prepared the sacrifice and issued a final deliberate challenge. "Drench it." Water flooded the wood, soaked the stones, and filled the trench. The offering stood submerged, a bold public mockery of the fallen rain god laid before the one true God. Elijah stood, his face turned toward the sky that had defied him for 3 years, and spoke, not screamed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let them know today that you are God in Israel, and that I, your servant, have done all this at your command." A brief, heavy silence. Then it came. It was not a gentle spark. It was a scorching, consuming, pure white firestorm. It descended not just upon the sacrifice, but it vaporized. The soaking water shattered the stones and licked the very dust from the earth beneath the altar. The mountain itself seemed to shudder under the weight of divine presence. The people who had climbed to witness a debate collapsed in absolute terror. Their doubt was instantly incinerated. They cried out, their voices unified in shattering awe. "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." The fire had fallen, but Elijah knew the narrative was incomplete. While the shaken Israelites stood in awe, Elijah cast his gaze toward the horizon. A sound faint yet unmistakable reached his ears, the distant whisper of coming rain, a sound no one else could perceive. He issued an immediate authoritative command to Ahab. "Hitch up your chariot and head down now before the rain halts your path." The king, bewildered, yet terrified by the day's events, obeyed, leaving the mountain beneath a harsh, unyielding blue sky. Elijah ascended higher, distancing himself from the crowd to a solitary place of prayer. There, the prophet who had commanded fire from the sky knelt, his face pressed against the earth. He prayed not once, but relentlessly wrestling with heaven. By his side, his servant waited. "Go up and look toward the sea," Elijah ordered. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. 6 times the servant returned with the same vacant answer. The sky remained sealed. Doubt, the silent enemy, crept in, whispering that the fire might have been the limit, that heaven had spoken enough. But Elijah would not rise. On the 7th time, the young servant returned, gasping, "Sir, I see a cloud, small, no bigger than a man's hand." It was all the confirmation Elijah needed. He leaped up, his urgency suddenly explosive. "Go tell Ahab, hurry, the rain is coming." In mere moments, the tiny cloud mutated and swelled. A powerful wind arose. Darkness swept across the dome of the sky. First, heavy drops struck the cracked earth. Then the entire firmament seemed to open, breaking the 3-year spell. The rain fell, ferocious, relentless cleansing. Streams revived. The drought was shattered. Then, the miraculous happened. The hand of the Lord fell upon Elijah. He tucked his cloak into his belt and began to run, propelled by supernatural power, outpacing Ahab's royal chariot. The prophet who had sealed the sky was now running ahead of the king beneath the newly opened sky. The fire proved who God was. The rain proved his mercy. Rain had fallen, fire had answered, and Elijah should have felt triumph. Instead, a single message shattered him. Jezebel's words arrived like poison carried on the wind. By this time tomorrow, she vowed Elijah would be dead. The woman whose prophets had fallen did not tremble. She hunted. Something broke inside the prophet. When Elijah heard these words, the heroic prophet who had called down fire and outrun chariots vanished. He was consumed by existential dread, a fear far darker than any physical threat. He fled southward, blindly abandoning his mission and the people he had just led back to God. He ran until he reached the deep wilderness, utterly alone and physically broken. Collapsing under the meager shade of a broom tree, he reached his breaking point. The victory on Carmel felt meaningless. The corruption of the monarchy seemed untouched. With tears, he could no longer hold back. He cried out a bitter, desperate prayer. "Enough, Lord. Take my life now, for I am no better than my ancestors." It was not just Jezebel's threat that shattered him, but the crushing burden of unbearable loneliness, the profound disappointment that his monumental effort had yielded no lasting national change. In that desolate moment, God did not answer with fire or thunder, but with compassion. A gentle hand touched him. He slowly opened his weary eyes and saw an angel beside him, who spoke with quiet authority. "Get up and eat." There before him lay bread, baked over hot coals, and a jar of fresh water. Elijah ate and drank, but the weariness of his soul was too heavy, and he slept again, hoping to escape his pain. But the angel returned, touching him with patient grace. "Get up and eat, for you still have a long journey ahead." Empowered by the mysterious sustenance, Elijah traveled 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb, the sacred mountain. Seeking refuge, he entered a dark cave. There, in that profound solitude, the voice of God asked gently, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He poured out his pain. "I have been fiercely zealous for you, Lord, but I am the only one left alive, and now they seek my life too." God invited him out to stand on the mountain. Suddenly, a colossal wind tore the rocks apart. Then an earthquake shook the ground. Then a blazing fire lit the peak. But the Lord was in none of the spectacular displays that Elijah was accustomed to. After the fire, a complete absolute silence fell, and out of that silence came something entirely new, a gentle whisper. Hearing that soft sound, Elijah knew God was there. He covered his face with his cloak, stepping out of the cave. The whisper did not accuse, it healed. God spoke, giving a new commission. "Go back. You will anoint new kings, and you will anoint Elisha to replace you." Then the greatest revelation. "I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, a hidden faithful remnant, who have not bowed to Baal." Elijah was not alone. The burden lifted. With renewed purpose, Elijah found Elisha, a wealthy farmer, working with 12 yoke of oxen. Elijah approached him silently, removed his own coarse cloak, and placed it upon the farmer's shoulders. Elisha immediately understood the weight of the divine call. He did not ask for a return ticket. Instead, he took the very yoke of oxen he worked with, slaughtered them, and used his plow and farm tools as firewood. He burned his past to cook his future. He severed every tie to the life he knew, leaving nothing to return to. Elisha followed Elijah, becoming his faithful servant, ready to take up the mantle of fire. Elijah's story teaches us that faith is not proven only in fire, but in endurance. God may use moments of power to reveal truth, but he shapes his servants in silence, exhaustion, and waiting. Even the strongest can break. Even the faithful can feel alone. Yet God does not abandon the weary. He feeds them, restores them, and speaks again. If you're walking through doubt, burnout, or fear, remember this: God is not finished with you. The same God who answers with fire also whispers hope. If this message encouraged you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful Bible stories that strengthen faith and reveal God's purpose.